Nothing under the sea was safe during the Devonian period with this massive armored predator swimming around. This ferocious fish had powerful jaws that could easily turn prey into chum, even its own kind. This fish almost gave the Megalodon a run for its money. This is Dunkloesteus.
Hi, I'm Thylacoleo Mary and you're watching Paleologic. Dunkloesteus terrelli lived in the Devonian Sea, a large and shallow inland sea that covered much of today's eastern North America.
The Dunkloesteus swam around the Devonian Sea about 100 million years before dinosaurs even existed. In fact, at the time, there were no terrestrial vertebrates at all. The Devonian was one of 6 periods of the larger Paleozoic era, which saw a huge radiation of fish, which is why it's appropriately dubbed the Age of Fishes, or as I like to call it, big ol' fish time.
The toughest of these fishes were the placoderms, a class of large, bony, armored fishes. Dunkloesteus was a genus of placoderm, and with at least 10 different species, it was both the most famous and most varied.
The largest species, Dunkloesteus terrelli, which we're focusing on today, reached lengths of 6 meters. That's the size of an orca. Weighing around 1,000 kilograms, Dunkloesteus terrelli was among the largest known Devonian animals.
With a mouth over a meter wide and armored plates almost 5 centimeters thick, this fish was a real tank.
Dunkloesteus terrelli was first discovered by amateur paleontologist J. Terrell and his son in 1867 on the shale cliffs of Lake Erie in Ohio. In 1930, David Dunkel, a paleontologist at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, found additional fossils, and so the combo moniker of Dunkloesteus terrelli was born.
Terrell dubbed his find the terrible fish. At the time, terrible was used to mean causing terror, and terror-causing this fish certainly was.
Thanks to its bladed, jaws-of-life-like jaws, Dunkloesteus terrelli had an extremely powerful bite. It was capable of opening its mouth 45 degrees and could snap its jaws shut with the force of over 7,400 newtons. It takes just about 4,000 newtons of force to break a femur, the strongest bone in the human body.
Their bite was almost twice as powerful as the famous bone-crushing hyena.
It was even stronger than today's lions, black bears, and even spotted hyenas. Only very large alligators and dinosaurs could chomp down harder than a Dunkloesteus.
If they ever do a sequel to the Meg, it should be called the Dunk.
Dunkloesteus didn't have teeth, but rather 2 blade-like protrusions flanked by self-sharpening jawbones. Not only were these bony plates perfect for slicing and dicing, the simple act of opening and closing its jaws ensured that they stayed sharp as knives.
So basically, the jaws of Dunkloesteus were both killing machines and whetstones in one. With that kind of efficiency, you can call them Swiss Army jaws.
The jaw action of the Dunkloesteus is part of the reason it became the top predator in its environment. Its jaws were not only extremely powerful when slamming shut, but also ridiculously quick to open.
So how do we know how fast it could open and close its jaws if it's been dead for hundreds of millions of years? In the case of Dunkloesteus, researchers used biomechanical modeling to reconstruct how it worked.
Instead of relying on modern relatives to give a comparative understanding of how extinct creatures moved, biomechanics of fossil creatures leans on the laws of physics.
Some things never change, and that certainly applies to the physical laws of ancient fish bites.
Biomechanical modeling is done to make predictions about things that can't be observed, like just how fast a long-extinct fish could open and shut its jaws. This study revealed that Dunkloesteus's jaws opened in about 60 milliseconds, meaning it may have even been taking advantage of the suction power it generated to catch elusive prey, like some modern fish.
The average human blink takes about 100 milliseconds, so it was literally faster than the blink of an eye.
The sheer speed and power of its jaws meant that Dunkleosteus terrelli was the apex predator of the seas and was able to eat basically whatever it wanted. Sharks, fish, even the armor of other placoderms would have been no match for those guillotine-like mouth blades.
Fossils of the dunk have been found with scars and wounds from other Dunkleosteus, so members of this ferocious species weren't even safe from their own siblings.
The armor of Dunkleosteus was formed of many interlocking plates, but only covered the head and neck of the fish. Their bodies were either naked or covered in small scales, which would have decayed quickly. This meant that often only the front portions of Dunkleosteus were fossilized, making it harder for us to get the full picture of these enormous fish. Another complicating factor is that the plates would often fall apart when the fish died, making it hard to puzzle them back together. A few fossil examples, however, do exist to show just how the plates fit together when the fish was alive.
So why don't we have giant armored fish today snapping at our legs at the beach?
Scientists believe that two separate events of low ocean oxygen levels during the Devonian were responsible for the extinction of all placoderms, including Dunkleosteus.
Basically, they all suffocated.
One recent study linked this latter mass extinction, called the Hindenburg event, to UV radiation entering through a hole in the ozone layer. Let's just hope we can put the brakes on our own human-caused climate change before we set off another mass extinction event.
Hey everyone, we have exciting news! We're thrilled to announce the release of Animalogic's very first book, Strange Creatures. This book dives into the most incredible animals we've ever featured on the show, with each chapter packed with my illustrations and stunning full-color images. It's a fun and engaging way to learn about the animal kingdom, and a perfect tool to spark kids' interest in science. Each chapter breaks down an animal's biology, behavior, and all the coolest facts you need to know about these fascinating creatures. Animalogic's Strange Creatures is a must-have addition to your own library, or the perfect gift for an animal lover this upcoming holiday season.
Click the link in the description to check it out, and if you can, order a copy. It would mean the world. Thank you so much, and I hope that you love the book. Larger than a T-Rex, and able to catch fish the size of bison. This ferocious predator from the Cretaceous is one of the most mysterious and controversial dinosaurs to ever live. Its secrets are only starting to be uncovered. This is the Spinosaurus. Today, we're delving into dangerous Cretaceous waters and discussing one of the biggest bones of contention in the dino world. What did Spinosaurus look like? The story of Spinosaurus starts in 1915, when a German paleontologist named Ernst Stromer discovered the known fossils of a theropod with 1.6 meter long and very narrow lower jaws and long spines coming out of its backbone. Wanting to be as descriptive as possible, he named it Spinosaurus and sent the fossils to the Bavarian State Collection of Paleontology in Munich, where it was estimated to be about 97 million years old. But during World War II, the fossils were destroyed during a bombing of the city. For decades, illustrations of these few bones were all we had. So Spinosaurus was imagined as a 16-meter-long T-Rex with a croc-like face and a back sail. Basically the coolest dino of all time. This was the last time that we had a unified vision of this dino, and everyone was happy. But then, we started finding more fossils, and the paleo community started breaking into factions. In the 1980s, a new similar species was discovered. It was called the Baryonyx. It had huge claws and showed that these were part of a family of dinosaurs, which was then named the Spinosauridae. These related species helped scientists piece together what Spinos would have looked like a little better, and cemented their place as one of the largest theropods ever known. The long snout suggested a fish-heavy diet, and the huge claws would have helped it grab prey close to the shore. Fortunately, or maybe unfortunately, we kept finding fossils, which contradicted our early perceptions of Spinos. It's like reading a book in reverse and understanding less and less as the pages turn. First of all, their hind legs were revealed to be extremely short compared to other theropods like T-Rex. They would make Spinos awkward and slow walkers, but might have been an adaptation for life in the water. They could have helped it swim like a crocodilian, and since they already had a croc-like face and likely ate fish, it would have made sense to spend more time in the water than other dinos. The bones were also more dense than in other theropods, which in other animals is used for buoyancy control. This is a bigger deal than it sounds like. Up until this point, there had been no indications of aquatic dinosaurs. Other aquatic creatures of the time, like plesiosaurs and mosasaurs, are technically not dinosaurs. It was weird. And then, tail vertebrae were discovered. The tail was revealed to be long, narrow, and flat, like the tail of an axolotl, which would have helped Spinosaurus propel itself in the water. Long and strong toe bones, similar to those found in modern shorebirds, suggested that they have the ability to walk in muddy or silty soil. They could have even been webbed, but unfortunately, we have no evidence of that. There is also evidence that they had pressure receptors along the snout, much like crocodilians. And then, the discovery of a large number of teeth in river environments suggested that they could have spent a lot of time, maybe all of their time, in the water. Of course, that would have been way too easy a conclusion for this debate. Evidence for a more land-based lifestyle also started mounting. Body reconstruction suggested it couldn't really stand upright in the water without tipping over, unless it was moving forward. The tail also seemed too weak to be used for propulsion as effectively as a crocodilian does. It also would have been too massive and awkward a swimmer to pursue prey underwater. The sail and tail may not have been for balance and propulsion respectively, but rather a display for sexual selection, like a peacock's tail. Or it could have been a structure for a thermoregulatory organ like elephant ears, or maybe even fat deposits, like a bison's hump. So depending on how you see it, it could have been an aquatic predator behaviorally similar to a croc, or a wading predator like a grizzly bear, who specialized in fish but could venture to land and eat carrion, or catch prey opportunistically. The whole issue is complicated by the fact that only 6 specimens have ever been found, and they've all been incomplete and of different ages and sizes. Making an accurate model has been difficult. Kind of like trying to solve a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, but you only have 6 pieces. Every sail vertebra ever found is broken, and we don't know how long they were, or if they created an arc or an M-shaped structure, or what its purpose was. We don't even know how powerful and propulsive the tail was. We don't know if when it walked on land, it moved like a bear with the ability to stand on its hind legs, or more like a pangolin, using its tail to balance while walking on 2 feet. We don't know how good of a swimmer it was, but we do know that it liked to eat fish and spend a lot of time near the water fishing. We know it was huge, and more importantly, that it was one of the coolest animals to ever live. So please, if you're out looking for fossils in the deserts of northern Africa, we need you to help us get closer to solving this puzzle. Until we do, it will continue to cause fights on paleo subreddits, provoke academic beefs, and break families of paleontologists apart.
Don't go calling this a leviathan, even though the name might sound similar. This underwater giant wasn't a sea serpent at all, but a long-extinct sperm whale ancestor. Where it differs from its squid-slurping modern cousins is that this creature had foot-long mouth daggers used for preying on other whales. This was Livyatan.
Today, we're talking about an extinct sperm whale that lived about 12 million years ago during the Miocene. Since about 2010, we've known this whale as the Livyatan.
At around 13 to 19 meters long, Livyatan would have been similar in size to modern sperm whales, the largest of today's toothed whales. The major difference between them, however, is that Livyatan had a mouthful of deeply rooted, 30-centimeter long, 10-centimeter wide teeth, the largest non-tusk teeth that have ever been recorded.
And the jaws that held these teeth were robust and humongous, big enough to hold a whole adult human inside.
Unlike Livyatan's 2 rows of giant gnashers, modern sperm whales have relatively small teeth only on the bottom that perfectly fit into sockets in the upper jaw. The difference between their teeth is due to how and on what these whale species fed. Modern sperm whales are apex predators that hunt in deep waters all over the globe for shark, squid, fish, and basically anything they can suction into their mouths.
We know that Livyatan didn't use suction to pull prey into its mouth like today's sperm whales. This giant was a pursuit predator, meaning that it hunted down and seized its prey. Livyatan would have clamped its powerful jaws around its kill and shredded it to ribbons, with some researchers even theorizing that its favorite snack was other whales, specifically the ancestors to modern baleen whales.
Livyatan's skull tells us a lot about what it would have hunted. The fact that its teeth were deeply embedded in its jaw made them extra stable and perfect for holding on to large, thrashing prey. The teeth were interlocking, so when those teeth met, it was like a meat cleaver coming down. The teeth were also angled forward, showing us that Livyatan's chompers would have been able to grip prey with curved bodies, like other whales.
Modern sperm whales consume about 3% of its body weight in food per day. If Livyatan really did feed on other whales, it would have been able to consume an even larger proportion of its body weight in whale meat with each kill.
The short, wide shape of the snout would have allowed the front teeth to clamp down extra hard, suggesting that Livyatan was preying on powerful animals that were much tougher than squishy squid. The side of its skull also held ridiculously strong jaw muscles that would have delivered high-powered bites.
Enormous teeth that seemed to have belonged to extinct sperm whale species have been found as far back as 1877. However, no one had ever found a matching skull. To complete the puzzle, paleontologists needed to find some jaws.
The happy ending to this fossil hunt came in November 2008, when the first Livyatan skull, measuring about 3 meters long, was found in Cerro Colorado, Peru. Over 300 fossilized marine vertebrates have been found here, with over 80% of them belonging to cetaceans, the family of marine mammals that includes whales, dolphins, and porpoises.
Livyatan was originally called Leviathan melvillei, honoring both the biblical sea serpent and Herman Melville, the author of Moby Dick. It wasn't until a few years later that paleontologists were made aware that the name Leviathan was already taken.
In 2010, they learned that the name Leviathan was already assigned to an extinct genus of mastodon. To avoid confusion, the International Code of Zoological Nomenclature strictly prohibits using a name twice, so they were forced to rename their discovery.
They didn't have to reach too far for its new name, as Livyatan is just the Hebrew translation for the English Leviathan. But that's not the only naming mishap that this group of whales has suffered.
The name sperm whale was given to these creatures during the height of the commercial whaling industry, which began around the end of the 18th century and continued well into the 1980s. Sperm whales were a huge target, partly due to the source of this misnomer, the spermaceti organ.
This enormous sac on the sperm whale's head was found to contain up to 2,000 liters of white fluid, which whalers at the time mistook for, well, sperm. And so it was dubbed the sperm whale. While people used the waxy spermaceti for everything from candles to cosmetics to industrial lubricants, the real purpose of the spermaceti organ is still up for debate. Some researchers think it was used as a reverberation chamber for echolocation, while other theories suggest that it's used to aid in the extreme deep dives sperm whales are known for. The top of Leviathan's skull sported a huge concave portion that was called the supracranial basin. This basin is what houses modern sperm whales' spermaceti organ and their melon. Not a fruit, but a mass of tissue that supports echolocation. Given the shape of its skull, Leviathan likely also had both a spermaceti organ and a melon. While we don't have a complete fossilized skeleton of Leviathan, similar whales from that time show that they most likely resembled modern sperm whales and would have been well adapted for deep dives in the ocean. Though we're not sure exactly what killed off Leviathan melvili, climate cooling at the end of the Miocene could have played a role in the demise of these predators. Thanks to conservation efforts, modern sperm whales are being slowly pulled back from the brink of extinction. Hopefully, these extant relatives will keep reminding us of and giving us clues about Leviathan for eons to come.
This oversized, pouched predator had a bite as strong as an African lion and was the largest carnivorous mammal Australia has ever seen. While it has no living relatives, this creature may have descended from the family of herbivores that gave rise to wombats and koalas. This is the marsupial lion, the Thylacoleo.
One of the fellest and most destructive of predatory beasts is how biologist Sir Richard Owen described the Thylacoleo.
This formidable predator was the size of a jaguar, but was built like a bear. Definitely not the fuzzy, cute image that comes to mind when you think about marsupials. The largest marsupial carnivores alive today are the Tasmanian devils and the tiger quolls.
These are our leopards or our wolves here. These are, I mean, they're not huge, but they make up for that with their aggression, so we'll see how it goes.
The largest of these weighs at most 8 kilograms, which is only a 20th of what the marsupial lion weighed.
Thylacoleo carnifex is definitely the most terrifying marsupial ever discovered. Its jaw was incredibly powerful, capable of chomping down with the strength of a large male lion.
But that is where the similarities between the mouths of African lions and marsupial lions ends.
Thylacoleo had a completely unique set of pearly whites, whose function is still not fully understood.
Unlike cat species, marsupial lions lacked large canine teeth. Instead, their 2 front teeth were enormous, making them look like giant rodents.
But their most dangerous teeth were actually their 3rd premolars along the sides of their mouths. These teeth were able to slice into flesh, acting like the marsupial equivalent of bolt cutters.
In addition to their teeth, Thylacoleo had enormous claws for ripping apart their prey, and were able to sit back on their haunches with the support of their strong tails like a kangaroo.
The marsupial lion belonged to Thylacoleonidae, a family of extinct carnivorous marsupials. The span of time that these species existed was vast.
We've found fossil evidence of various species from the Oligocene era, beginning about 34 million years ago, to the Pleistocene era, which ended about 12,000 years ago. So far, 4 genera and 10 different species of marsupial lions have been identified. Members of the Thylacoleonidae family ranged from the house cat-sized Lecanaleo genus to the lion-sized Thylacoleo. Despite their solid place in Australia's history, fossil evidence suggests that not more than 2 species of this family ever existed at the same time. Thylacoleo carnifex is by far the most famous of the group. And luckily, there are plenty of fossils all over Australia to teach us about these unique and unusual animals. In 2002, a massive discovery of marsupial lion fossils was made in a cave in Nullarbor Plain in southern Australia.
1 complete and 12 incomplete skeletons were found, changing the game in terms of our understanding of these creatures.
It is thought that they unwittingly fell into the caves while either hunting or were perhaps drawn by the scent of potential food.
While most carnivores evolved from other carnivores, paleontologists believe that Thylacoleonids descended from one of 2 groups of herbivores, the wombat and koala suborder or the possum family.
Despite the lion in their name, the physiology of the feet of the marsupial lion suggests that its greatest strength was not sprinting like a hunting lioness. In fact, their feet barely seem like they were evolved to run at all.
This gave rise to the theory that Thylacoleo was a drop cat. Drop cats are not to be confused with drop bears, an imaginary, totally real creature that Australians tell stories about to scare tourists.
The best explanation for their feet structure is that Thylacoleo would wait in a tree for its prey to wander underneath and drop down on top of them, similar to what leopards and arboreal felines sometimes do.
One study suggests that Thylacoleonids were arboreal and scansorial, meaning they were tree dwellers with a knack for climbing.
Massive opposable thumb-like claws helped them not only attack their prey, but also to expertly mount trees.
With their size and strength, it's no question that Thylacoleo was the greatest mammalian predator that ever lived in Australia.
Marsupial lions lived in Australia until their extinction, around 50,000 years ago. They belong to an assemblage of land animals weighing more than 45 kilograms, known as the megafauna, jumbo-sized creatures that roamed the continent during the last ice age.
So what happened to the marsupial lion 50,000 years ago? We don't have to look much beyond ourselves to answer that question.
It was around this time that humans arrived in Australia. One theory suggests that these new residents were looking to protect themselves and killed off this dangerous predator.
Others hint that the marsupial lion's food supply was cut off by humans overhunting their prey. Fire and our ability to control it to shape landscapes may have also contributed to habitat loss, which led to their extinction.
Whatever the cause of their extinction, all we know is that Thylacoleo disappeared along with Australia's other megafauna. While it may be gone, its fossil evidence remains to remind us that Australia had and continues to be home to some of the world's most amazing creatures.
A river monster who could take on dinosaurs and fish the size of great white sharks. Their cousins walk among us, but we're just beginning to understand them. A giant killer among giants. This is the Sarcosuchus.
Around 120 million years ago, there lived a creature that made even the dinosaurs tremble.
The Sarcosuchus lived in the rivers of Gondwana, which later split into South America and Africa. This croc-like creature wasn't really a crocodilian, but belonged to a related clade called Pholidosauridea.
But for comparison purposes, let's take a moment to talk about the saltwater crocodile.
These behemoths can get up to 6 meters in length and weigh over 1,000 kilograms. They can catch and eat prey as large as gowers and water buffaloes. They're the largest living reptiles on the planet today. But this modern giant would seem like a little lizard next to the mighty Sarcosuchus, who scientists believe could have been up to 12 meters long and weighed over 4,000 kilograms.
There still is a bit of uncertainty on their size because there are no complete fossils of this ancient beast. All we have are estimates based on the size of their skull and their hip bones.
But even the most conservative calculations put it at least 50% longer and 3 times heavier than the largest living crocodilians. The snout of a juvenile was over a meter long,
and it was relatively narrow with a bump at the end, similar to the Indian gharial. Its shape tells us that they mostly fed on fish for the first several years of their lives. Narrow snouts are more hydrodynamic than broader ones, so it takes less force to rapidly open and close them underwater. Their prey is bitten and swallowed in the blink of an eye. As they got older, their snout got wider and their diet became more varied. This type of transformation is not seen in modern crocodilians, but supported a life where they started out eating fish and then would get big enough to catch prey outside of the water. Their eyes could only move up and down, so we can deduce that they would hang out near the shore, just waiting for the right moment to snap at whatever came their way. Their expanded menu included dinosaurs and other vertebrates, such as large turtles that ventured too close to the water. Catching dinosaurs was obviously a dangerous business, so to protect themselves, Sarcosuchus had a thick layer of bony scales all the way from their neck to the middle of their tails. It was a nightmare in shining armor. Even though they could eat more things as adults, fish were still a viable option. One of their likely prey was a giant riverfish called Mausonia, a coelacanth-like leviathan that could reach 6 meters in length, about the same size as Bruce from Jaws. Getting this big and deadly could take decades. And sometimes we can tell the age of a fossil animal by cutting a thin section of their bone and counting the lines of arrested growth. Kind of like the growth rings you count on the inside of a tree trunk. These lines are formed when the animal's metabolism slows down dramatically, usually during the winter. So in effect, each line represents a year of age. A fossil of one Sarcosuchus individual, estimated to have died at 80% of its maximum potential size, was found to have been about 40 years old based on these growth lines. So from this, we can extrapolate that they reached their full monstrous size at about 60 years of age. There's still a lot left to learn about this magnificent species. We've only discovered a handful of fossils, but excavations are ongoing. Their fossils are mostly found in deserts in remote areas of North Africa. Some of the most recent discoveries took place in Tatooine, Tunisia, a place that was the shooting location for a famous desert planet in a somewhat popular space opera. It's wild to think that that area was once a lush forest. But hey, the Earth changes, and those changes are what make evolution happen. This supersized snake is the largest the world has ever seen. This gargantuan reptile was so long that it wouldn't have had any trouble wrapping itself around the belly of a blue whale. This is Titanoboa. Titanoboa is the new kid on the snake block, having only been discovered in 2009. But it's been making a big splash in paleontology circles ever since. Titanoboa was discovered in the Cerrejón coal mine in northeastern Colombia. That is where it gets the second half of its scientific name, Titanoboa cerrejonensis. And it certainly deserves the first half, as this snake was a true titan. Initially, the paleontologists studying the site didn't even recognize the vertebrae as snake bones since they were so large. Even they were shocked to find such a massive snake among the layers of coal. At a whopping 13 meters long and almost a meter wide, Titanoboa weighed over 1,100 kilograms. That's longer than a Tyrannosaurus rex, as wide as a doorway, and heavier than a walrus. Before Titanoboa, the largest snake ever discovered was Gigantophis garstini, a 7-meter-long serpent that lived in North Africa about 40 million years ago. But at about twice its length, Titanoboa makes Gigantophis look like just a little guy in comparison. To give you an idea of how these two giants stack up against snakes today, the longest living snake is the reticulated python, which averages just over 6 meters long, or about the length of a short school bus.
Until Titanoboa was discovered, herpetologists debated for decades just how large a snake could theoretically get. Their best estimate was around 12 meters long, and Titanoboa at 13 meters long absolutely smashed everyone's expectations.
Among the fossilized ribs and vertebrae that were found in the coal mine, about 30 individuals of Titanoboa were identified, including a complete skeleton and skull. The rocks in which they were found were dated about 60 million years old, from shortly after the mass extinction that killed off the dinosaurs.
That makes Titanoboa the world's largest predator we know of for a period of over 30 million years, until the emergence of Megalodon 23 million years ago. You know, the massive 15-meter-long shark, everyone's favorite whale eater.
Snakes like Titanoboa are poikilothermic, or in other words, they're a type of cold-blooded animal whose body temperature fluctuates.
This means that they cannot regulate their own temperature and rely on thermal energy from the environment to power their metabolism. The body shape of poikilotherms, which are often flat like fish or elongated like snakes, helps them heat up and cool down quickly.
The largest snakes today live around the equator, because the higher temperatures allow for the development of bigger bodies. The further you get away from sweltering temperatures, the smaller the poikilotherms become.
To determine Titanoboa's size, paleontologists took the relationship between the size of living snakes and their vertebrae and applied it to the ancient serpent. Paleontologists believe that Titanoboa had more than 250 vertebrae.
So how did Titanoboa actually get this big? The growth strategy of other giant reptiles since the last mass extinction has been to extend the duration of their growth so that they keep growing for longer.
One study suggests that Titanoboa not only spent more time growing than its ancestors, but was also growing faster, which would explain why this snake was able to get so big.
A large proportion of the adult individuals found in the coal mine were 13 meters long, suggesting that this may have been the average adult size and not just an outlier.
Prior to Titanoboa's discovery, not a single land-dwelling animal from 55 to 65 million years ago had ever been found in tropical South America. Because of the relationship between size and ambient temperature, the discovery of Titanoboa actually helped scientists gain a greater understanding of the environment and climate in which it lived.
They concluded that the temperature would have needed to be at least 30 degrees Celsius to support Titanoboa's growth to those gigantic dimensions.
Plant fossils in the area that resembled today's tropical plants showed that Titanoboa lived in an ancient rainforest, the oldest one ever found in South America and the foundation on which our current Amazon ecosystem is built.
But Titanoboa wasn't the only treasure discovered in the Cerrejón coal mine.
Fossil hunting can be difficult in areas where there is no exposed rock.
The mine, however, unearthed a wealth of other fossils, from turtles to crocodiles to fish. This showed that the area at the time was a swampy environment, similar to the Florida Everglades.
The presence of these aquatic animals supported the hypothesis that Titanoboa spent lots of time in water. Given its huge size, Titanoboa was likely quite awkward on land and probably preferred to glide around in the water like today's anacondas. Their teeth also seemed to be better suited to catch fish, which supports the idea that they were aquatic. Their diet likely consisted of giant freshwater fish and potentially large crocodiles. Step aside, Steve Irwin. These guys were likely the original crocodile hunters.
Will Titanoboa remain the largest snake ever discovered? Or are there even larger fossilized serpents waiting to be uncovered? If so, I hope that one day they slither into our lives.
These ferocious killers were the size of bears with eagle-like beaks and knives for feet. Their deadliness remains unmatched by modern predators. Their rule was long and brutal, and then they swiftly disappeared forever. These birds ruled over the Age of Terror, These are the terror birds.
For millions of years in the Miocene, South America was a strange and dangerous place.
It was a time when the continent was isolated and weird animals evolved to fill the ecological niches that dinosaurs used to occupy. The top predator placental mammals that rule today, like big cats and dogs, hadn't arrived yet. The land was dominated by carnivorous marsupials like the Thylacoleo, crocodilian reptiles like the Prehistoric, one weird carnivorous armadillo, and, of course, predatory birds. But we're not talking about eagles, hawks, or condors.
This land was ruled by terrestrial birds, some of which were over 2 meters tall and had the biggest bird heads ever recorded.
It's hard not to get a big head when you're the largest terror bird, but Kelenken took it to the extreme.
Just for context, the shoebill stork has one of the biggest heads among living birds.
Their beak is about 25 centimeters long, with sharp edges and a pointy tip. You do not want to have any part of you caught in its jaws.
But the shoebill's beak, plus their entire body, which can be as tall as me, only adds up to about 7 kilos in weight.
The Kelenken's head alone was heavier than a whole shoebill. Their skull was 3 times longer than a shoebill's, and their total body weight was 40 times more than a shoebill, measuring roughly 250 kilograms.
Yes, these birds were as heavy as grizzly bears, except unlike bears, they hunted on 2 legs. So they were in many ways more similar to a theropod dinosaur like Velociraptor than to any living predator.
Kelenken was about 3 meters long from head to tail and roughly 2 meters tall.
A single peck could probably split your head open, but we're not entirely sure if that's how they got their food.
The most common theories are that they killed their prey by pecking it to death or by grabbing them and shaking to snap their neck.
It's also possible that Kelenken was a kleptoparasitic scavenger and mostly stole other predators' prey.
That means these birds not only terrorized delicious prey animals, but also other ferocious predators as well. Nobody was safe from terror birds. Their fossils have been found in formations in Patagonia alongside extinct rodents like guillemots and sparacidonts, who are marsupial-like predators. They might have been both eaten by the Kelenken and caught prey that the bird would later steal. Ground sloth babies were another likely prey of the terror bird. Yep, that's the saddest sentence I've ever said.
Kelenken was far from the only terror bird. One species was so successful that it was one of the few predators to colonize North America during the Great American Interchange.
This was Titanus, a badass name for a badass predator who lived from about 5 to 2 million years ago. It was slightly shorter than Kelenken and much leaner. It weighed roughly 150 kilograms, about the same as a jaguar or a small black bear. But as we know from those modern animals, that's plenty of weight to be a fearsome predator.
So far, fossils of Titanus have only been found in Florida and Texas, and there's a huge geographical gap between them and their closest relatives in South America.
That means that there were likely other terror bird species that exploited the rainforest habitats of Central America. We just haven't found them yet.
That might be an interesting project if you're an emerging paleontologist. We just ask that if you find a new species, you name it Animalogico.
Terror birds emerged shortly after the extinction of their ancestors, the dinosaurs, around 62 million years ago, and were at the top of the food chain for almost 60 million years.
Siloteris, the youngest recorded species, lived until sometime between 80 and 6,000 years ago.
Humans entered South America about 14,000 years ago. So if you're of South American descent, there's a decent chance your ancestors went head-to-head with a terror bird. I don't envy them. These birds could kill you before you even knew they were there.
Terror birds were not only huge, they were also fast. Some species, such as Mesembryornis milnedwardsi and Patagornis marshii, could run upwards of 70 kilometers per hour. That's as fast as an ostrich.
The difference is that ostriches evolved to run away from cheetahs, lions, and wild dogs, whereas terror birds could have hunted those big animals themselves.
CT scans of terror bird skulls show that they were not likely to be huge biters.
Their musculature wasn't meant to crush bone the way hyenas and crocodiles' jaws do.
To take on larger prey, they probably used a combination of kicking, pecking, and possibly grabbing their prey with their massive beak and slamming it onto the ground.
This is similar to how modern predatory birds, like secretary birds and roadrunners, kill their prey. Their feet were equipped with large claws that could tear open flesh, and were longer than the famously lethal cassowary's claws. Though even without the claws, the sheer force of their kicks would have been enough to at least stun their prey.
After that, depending on the prey, they would swallow it whole or shred it apart and eat the best pieces.
Unfortunately, the changes in climate and the arrival of placental mammals like wolves and big cats were the doom of terror birds. Every empire crumbles eventually, and in this case, it was these furry animals that came to take the crown.
But there's still a living relative of terror birds hiding in South America, biding its time, waiting for the right chance to make a power move. We have secured some footage, but viewer discretion is advised. This is the closest living relative of the Kalinkin, the Seriema. Okay, they're not as terrifying as their extinct cousins, but they do exhibit a lot of behaviors that are associated with terror birds.
I'd love to talk more about them, but they deserve their own episode.
We're still finding amazing fossils in South America. There are over 20 known species of terror birds and plenty more to be discovered. Stay tuned as we keep learning from these amazing beasts, although let's hope they don't come back to reclaim their crown.
Deep in the forests of Tasmania lived a ferocious hunter. It ruled Australia and then disappeared. Some say it's still around, living in the shadows, waiting for a chance to return. This is the Thylacine.
This species is a little controversial because unlike every other animal in this series, some people believe that it's still alive.
The Thylacine, also known as the Tasmanian tiger or the marsupial wolf, was common across the Australian mainland and Tasmania just a few thousand years ago. The Thylacine was shaped like a dog and was slightly smaller than a pit bull. 15 to 20 stripes across its rump and tail earned it the nickname the Tasmanian tiger. They were used for camouflage, just like other striped predators like actual tigers and numbats, their closest living relatives. But outside of the stripes, they were so similar to dogs that sometimes Thylacine skulls are compared to wolf skulls to test zoology students as part of their final exams.
If you're ever given a skull and asked to tell if it's a wolf or a thylacine, the main clue is that in the thylacine skull, there's a pair of holes in the palate bone.
Their biologies were similar to canids because their lifestyle was similar. They were observed walking in packs and pursuing prey like wolves do. But little else is known about them due to their secretive nature. There are Aboriginal paintings dating back hundreds of years, both on the mainland and Tasmania. But by the time European scientists saw them for the first time in the early 1800s, they only survived on the island. They reportedly loved eating chickens and other birds, including the now extinct Tasmanian emu. Other common prey were the Tasmanian native hen, yes, that's their real name, and smaller mammals like bandicoots and possums.
The size of their prey was limited by their jaws. Even though they could open it up to an impressive 80 degrees, they couldn't apply a lot of force. Hollow bird bones were the perfect meal for them.
Unfortunately, their predilection for poultry made them a target for farmers, and bounties were set up to control their populations.
Thylacines were similar to other carnivorous marsupials, like the Tasmanian devil.
The joeys didn't venture out of the pouch until they were about 12 weeks, and were dependent on their moms until they were at least half their adult size. Litters usually had 2 to 4 joeys, limited by the mother's 4 teats, and were born year-round, though the winter seems to have been their preferred breeding season.
Thylacines were unique among Australian marsupials because the males also had pouches. They weren't for carrying babies, but they were used for protecting their scrotums, like a wallet and a purse.
Babies would stick around until they were able to contribute to the hunt, and then eventually would disperse and find new terrains. Their life expectancy was similar to other carnivorous marsupials at just about 8 years.
Unfortunately, their bird-eating ways were no match for the more generalist dingo, their biggest rivals. When those dogs entered the Australian mainland 4,000 years ago, it was the beginning of the end for the thylacine.
Dingoes are great hunters and can survive on a more varied diet. During times of scarcity, dingoes were a lot more resilient, and little by little, the thylacine died out on the mainland. Only mummified specimens remain in the caves of the Nullarbor Plains. Other marsupial carnivores, like the Tasmanian devils, suffered a similar fate, and their last refuge is Tasmania, where there are no dingoes.
This Tasmanian ecosystem for thylacines lasted for over 4,000 years, until another outsider entered the game: Europeans.
Europeans hunted the thylacine's prey, Tasmanian emus, to extinction. They started culls, put bounties on thylacines, and fragmented their habitat to the point that the thylacine's survival was impossible.
Additionally, the last populations were known to have a form of distemper, a viral infection that usually affects dogs. The virus might have sped up the decline of thylacine populations.
In 1930, the last known wild thylacine was killed by a farmer. The last remaining individuals survived in zoos for a few years after that, but breeding them in captivity was very difficult, and they all slowly died out. The last known thylacine died in 1936. He's known as Benjamin, and he died when he was left outside during a particularly cold night in September. By then, there were conservation efforts, but it was a little too late. And so, the thylacine was gone and lost to the memory of mankind forever.
Or was it? There have been dozens of unconfirmed reports of sightings since then, and some people still firmly believe that the thylacine is still around.
Most of the reports are from Western Australia and Southern Victoria. Several studies with trap cams have been done, but so far, no live thylacines have been found. There are even bounties on sightings, so if you're strapped for cash and want to go on a cryptozoology adventure, consider looking for thylacines. There's still a bit of hope, because researchers have found tracks and scat that could be from thylacines, but they don't know for sure.
If thylacines are indeed extinct, then our last possible chance to see them is to clone them. It might be a long shot, but we have enough specimens that we've managed to sequence the complete thylacine genome.
It's still very early, and we're still trying to figure out the ethical, technological, and ecological issues around cloning. But if it does happen, we could see the return of thylacines, as well as other recently extinct animals such as dodos and mammoths. But for now, all we have are museum and lab specimens, which are reminders of the amazing creatures we have lost recently, and a warning to preserve other species from going the way of the dodo and the thylacine.
So let's appreciate what we have and continue to do all that we can to help our ecosystems.
The largest shark who ever lived. This leviathan struck terror in the hearts of mammals for millions of years. Their demise was abrupt and left a huge open niche in ocean ecosystems. Could a new beast assume the role of giant killer? This is the Megalodon.
The Megalodon is one of the most fearsome predators of all time. If you think the great white shark is scary, this submarine carnivore will give you nightmares.
Megalodon was massive, big enough to eat whales. Some estimates put them at around 18 meters, though there's some debate about that because all we have left of them is their teeth. Like all sharks, Megalodon's skeleton was made of cartilage, which doesn't fossilize. Luckily, their teeth were made of calcium phosphate minerals, which do fossilize. So we have plenty of huge teeth to get an idea of Megalodon's monstrous size. Their teeth are the largest of any shark ever found.
And they're really, really, really big.
A mature great white shark's teeth are up to 7 centimeters. Megalodon's larger known teeth are over 20 centimeters long. Just look at how tiny great white's teeth look next to them.
Megalodon made the great white shark seem like the meh white shark. And it did for a long time.
Megalodon appeared in the fossil record around 20 million years ago, a new time for Earth where grasslands and kelp forests had just developed, and new species were thriving. From then, they gradually got larger, reaching their maximum size right before extinction, around 3 million years ago.
During their reign, there was no safe haven in the ocean, especially if you're fat and delicious.
Megalodon, like their extant cousins, ate fatty marine mammals, which, to be fair, weren't as massive as they are now. We know of this shark cetacean diet because scientists have found whale bones with shark tooth marks that could only have been made by a megalodon. One of those mammalian snacks was Piscobalina, which was about 5 meters long. Not nearly as large as modern baleen whales, but just slightly smaller than orcas.
That's still nothing to scoff at. Killing something that big required gigantic jaws and a powerful bite.
Their mouth could be up to 3 meters wide, enough to eat you and a puma whole at the same time. Not that they would have liked you, you're probably too bony compared to their favorite snacks. Their killing strategy seemed to have been ambushing whales from below and biting off a big chunk of their guts. The whale would be dead before they even knew what bit them.
With a body made for killing giants, baby megalodons were under a lot of pressure to grow up quickly.
Studies done at the fossil sites of megalodon nurseries show that megalodon were born about 2 meters long, about the size of a sea lion, and could have reached their full size at just 25 years of age. It's unclear what they ate in their youth, but like most shark species, the competition was likely intense, and few would reach their full size. Cannibalism is relatively common in sharks, and for portions of their life, their siblings would have been the most available source of food.
It's a dangerous business being a shark, and unfortunately for this species, their chapter in the Book of Life came to an end pretty abruptly.
For such a formidable hunter to go extinct, it probably took massive changes in their environment. Changes in ocean currents caused by shifts in the tectonic plates caused major changes in the water temperatures. This likely caused krill to become less abundant in tropical waters. Several whale species went extinct, and many of those who survived moved to areas with better food supply, such as colder polar waters. Megalodon likely couldn't survive or at least breed in those areas. So, with not enough whales in the tropics and a huge body requiring lots of energy, Megalodon starved to oblivion.
This was the best day ever for cetaceans, and they raved on for millions of years until humans got involved and spoiled the party.
But in just those couple million years without megalodons, whale populations exploded. New species appeared, including the amazingly huge blue whale. Without a whale-eating apex predator, there was little pressure to be nimble, and their bodies essentially became factories to turn tiny crustaceans into blubber reservoirs.
But this wasn't truly the end to megalodon's place in the human psyche. Their amazing biology has fascinated people for as long as their teeth have been discovered by beachgoers.
Naturalists and scientists have been studying their teeth since at least the 1600s. Of course, at the time, most people assumed the teeth belonged to dragons or monsters. But the similarity to great white teeth was quickly pointed out, and the myth of a living giant shark was born. The name Megalodon was coined back in 1843, and from those early teeth analyses, everyone could tell they were like nothing we'd ever seen before or since. Their teeth are still being found and sold on the internet, and even though these fossils belong in museums, many people still buy them. Though the larger teeth go for thousands of dollars, so maybe not the savviest investment.
And yet, many people still wonder if there could still be any megalodons alive in the depths of the ocean.
But don't worry, something so big would have been spotted by now. They would have to come closer to the surface to look for whales. The ocean is a peaceful place where you can go and relax and enjoy the beauty of the natural. A humongous unicorn that fought the greatest predators of its time, including humans. A powerful weapon so extraordinary, we're still trying to figure out how it worked. Were these giants killers or chillers? Animalogic is going prehistoric. This is the Elasmotherium on Paleologic. Elasmotherium were a genus of giant rhino relatives that lived from about 2.6 million to just about 40,000 years ago.
That means they were alive at the same time as humans. Some of your ancestors may have eaten it, while others were possibly mauled by it. Or, if you lived in a galaxy far, far away, you might have known it as the mudhorn. This is the way.
They have become a bit of a celebrity extinct mammal due to their allegedly gigantic horn, which some researchers have estimated at up to 3 meters long. For comparison, the largest horn among living rhinos belongs to the white rhino, which is about 60 centimeters long on average, though some can get over a meter long. You wouldn't want to be on the business end of that hardened spike. But, as with anything in paleontology, there's usually more to the story than meets the eye.
In a recent paper, researchers hypothesized that the horn may actually have been a much smaller bump, which is controversial because it shakes up most of what we think we know about this animal.
We also have this cave painting, which is thought to be a person's interpretive drawing of an Elasmotherium. The horn is large, but not as huge as some people have estimated it to be.
The outer layer of the horn was likely made of keratin, the same material that makes up your hair and fingernails, with a core that was strengthened by calcium and melanin deposits to prevent breakages.
Keratin doesn't usually fossilize, so all we have are educated guesses based on a dome on their forehead that seems to be the base of the horn-generating tissue, and a spine that seems to have supported a large muscular hump.
This musculature is only really necessary if you're wielding a heavy object, so a big horn makes sense. But it wasn't just a fancy adornment.
These giants lived alongside saber-toothed cats, cave bears, lions, and hyenas. You had to be able to fight your way out of an encounter with such huge predators. Even if a full-grown Elasmotherium was likely safe, there was a constant need to protect the young.
So despite all the illustrations you've seen, we aren't 100% sure how big the horn was.
Even with a smaller horn, these mammals would have been deadly. They likely weighed up to 5 tons, which is just slightly smaller than the largest living land mammal, the African bush elephant. Their legs were longer than those in modern hippos and were much more horse-like, meaning they could probably gallop like a pony. But given their weight, they probably couldn't run as fast as Seabiscuit.
They were built more like a Clydesdale than a thoroughbred. Now, this horse and ancient rhino comparison might seem obtuse, but these two animals are actually quite closely related.
They're both members of the Perissodactyla order, meaning they're both odd-toed ungulates, or they walked on only 1 or 3 toes on each foot.
Like their equine cousins, Elasmotherium were grazers, meaning that they fed on grass, though their teeth were better adapted to coarser and thicker grasses than modern horses' teeth. Some have hypothesized that they would also dig into the ground to feed on plant bulbs, tubers, and roots.
Elasmotherium had hypsodont teeth, which are a kind of dentition with tall crowns and enamel that is folded into sheets, protecting the teeth from wearing away and resulting in more efficient chewing. This feature, and not their horn, is what gives these animals their name. Elasmos is ancient Greek for laminated, and therion means beast.
Similar to rodents whose incisors grow continuously, Elasmotherium's molars never stopped growing to prevent them from wearing away and causing them to starve to death.
Elasmotherium originated in China, likely descending from the Sinotherium, and slowly moved westward to the Balkans. Their cousins, the modern-day rhinos, bear their horns on their nose, while Sinotherium had theirs halfway between their nose and forehead, and Elasmotherium had their horn right above their eyes, giving them their nickname, the Siberian unicorn.
Less mythical than a unicorn, but just as magical.
But while rhinos and Elasmotherium resemble each other, they're not as closely related as they seem. Their most recent common ancestor lived about 45 million years ago, give or take, giving the two groups plenty of time to evolve into very different animals.
You are more closely related to the IKEA monkey than they are to each other. We're still not even sure if their skin was thick and rugged like a modern rhino, or if they were woolly like a mammoth.
Regardless of what they looked like, this was an extremely successful animal. Elasmotherium were found all the way from Eastern Europe to East Asia when they were at their most widespread.
The last living species was Elasmotherium sibericum, which was found throughout Eurasia. Its name was in reference to the Russian princess Ekaterina Dashkova, who donated the first known fossils of this species to Moscow University in the early 1800s.
This species far outlived all other Elasmotherium species, but eventually fell victim to a changing climate. The lush grasslands on which they lived began to freeze at the beginning of the last ice age, and by about 40,000 years ago, they were mostly tundra.
And little by little, the real-life unicorn disappeared.
Flash forward to today, and the largest living land mammal in Eurasia is the mighty European bison, which only weighs about 1/10 of what an Elasmotherium did. The world might have lost a bit of magic when we lost these fantastic beasts, but by studying living animals like the European bison, we can get a glimpse at how these formidable historic beings lived and behaved.
Look out! It's a croc! It's a whale! Nope, it's a giant swimming lizard with a tail like a shark. This extinct leviathan has had scientists scratching their heads since the very beginnings of paleontology, when the controversial concept of extinction itself was just starting to gain acceptance. This is the Mosasaurus.
Today, we're talking about the extinct Muse monster, Mosasaurus.
Before it was fully classified, 18th century scientists thought this creature was a giant crocodile, a large-toothed whale, or a whale-like fish, before settling on what we know Mosasaurus to be today, a giant marine lizard.
Mosasaurus was first found in the 1760s, when paleontology was just starting to become a field of study. It's been around so long that it was named before our modern standards of scientific nomenclature came into use.
This led to Mosasaurus becoming a so-called catch-all or wastebasket taxon, with many different species being tossed in over the decades.
Since 1822, over 50 species have been lumped into the Mosasaurus genus, and paleontologists are still trying to figure out what belongs and what doesn't. But when we say Mosasaurus today, we're usually referring to the species Mosasaurus hoffmanni.
One of the largest specimens we have of Mosasaurus hoffmanni indicates it could have been about 17 meters long, or a little larger than a humpback whale.
Insane!
Jesus Christ.
Most of what we know about Mosasaurus hoffmanni comes from fossilized skulls. We know, for example, that it was one of the most advanced mosasaurs.
Its jaws were highly adapted for powerful bites. Evidence of healed and broken jawbones indicates that they were particularly violent, either with their prey or during fights with rivals. So Mosasaurus definitely earned its spot as apex predator. Its large eye sockets and poorly developed olfactory organs show us that it was likely a surface swimmer, similar to today's crocodiles. The evidence we have from the geography of the time suggests that it lived in deep waters near the shore.
Initial descriptions claimed that this reptile had a long, sleek body with a tapered tail. Although we don't have any fossilized evidence of Mosasaurus's tail, the preserved body outline of a smaller mosasaur suggests that they had a bi-lobed tail, which would have been more shark-like than reptilian.
This is an example of convergent evolution, where unrelated organisms develop similar traits to adapt to their environments. A modern example would be the fingerprints of koalas and humans. We needed them to better grip tools, and koalas needed them to better climb the slippery bark of the eucalyptus tree. In this case, sharks and some mosasaurs, though unrelated, both evolved bi-lobed tails.
So while we don't know for sure what the Mosasaurus tail looked like, at least we know that other members of its family evolved a tail that was better adapted to the life aquatic.
The first Mosasaurus hoffmanni fossil was found way back in 1764 in a chalk quarry near the Meuse River in the Netherlands. The next was a more complete skull found in the same quarry in the 1780s. This second specimen became the holotype and was so significant and well known at the time that it was seized by the French Revolutionary Army in the siege of Maastricht and carried off to Paris.
It was here that in 1808, French naturalist Georges Cuvier, the father of paleontology, named the fossil Mosasaurus, which means lizard of the Meuse River.
He noted that its jaws resembled that of a monitor lizard, and determined it was indeed a giant marine reptile unlike any living creature. At the time, Cuvier was trying to promote his theories about extinction, a concept that was completely new and extremely controversial.
The giant jaws of this marine lizard that was clearly no longer swimming up and down the Meuse River provided some hard evidence that extinction was in fact legit.
Mosasaurs were a group of lizards that are secondarily aquatic. All land-dwelling animals evolved from a common sea-dwelling ancestor which crawled out of the water over 500 million years ago and began to diversify.
In the case of secondarily aquatic animals, at some point in their evolution, their ancestors were living on land and then made their return to the water.
We have lots of examples of secondarily aquatic animals today, like whales, which evolved from ancient land-dwelling mammals. We know they used to live on land because of their mammalian biology. They breathe air, nurse their young with milk, and inside their flippers are hand and finger bones.
Mosasaur ancestors also ventured back into the waves during the late Cretaceous period, where they became the dominant marine reptile.
Sea levels were much higher at the time, so Mosasaurus was able to spread to a number of locations throughout the world, with fossils so far having been found all over the planet from South Dakota to Turkey to the Netherlands.
Until recently, one ongoing question about mosasaurs was whether or not they were covered in scales.
This information is key to understanding just how well adapted they were to life in the water. The recent discovery of the fossilized impressions of the scales of Aplodosaurus, a member of the Mosasauridae family, is the first ever record of mosasaur skin we've found. The purpose of these scales was likely to reduce drag and help the Aplodosaurus glide through the water.
Kind of like how the dimples of a golf ball help it whoosh through the air.
Like many other giant reptile families, including dinosaurs, all mosasaurs fell victim to the asteroid-induced mass extinction event that happened 66 million years ago. Despite more than 250 years of search and study, there are still so many juicy secrets left to uncover about the Mosasaurus. Maybe one day we'll even get a good look at that elusive tail.
What's scarier than a Komodo dragon? How about a Komodo dragon that's about twice the length of a car? This massive monitor lizard roamed Australia during the last ice age and was even around when the first humans arrived. This is the largest lizard to ever live, the lost lizard king of Australia, the Megalania.
There's no debating that Australia is full of creatures that want you dead. But looking back into the ancient history of this continent, you'll find a whole new level of deadly, gigantic beasts.
Varanus priscus, otherwise known by the badass moniker Megalania, was a giant monitor lizard that lived in Australia 50,000 years ago during the Pleistocene.
And during this period, Australia was chock full of megafauna.
Examples of these gigantor species include Zaglossus hacketi, an echidna the size of a sheep, Diprotodon optatum, a relative of the wombat that was the size of a hippo, Thylacoleo carnifex, the marsupial lion, and Procoptodon goliath, a 10-foot-tall kangaroo.
But when it came to giant lizards, Megalania was king. In fact, as far as we've discovered, Megalania is the largest lizard to have ever walked the earth.
The largest lizard living today, Varanus komodoensis, otherwise known as the Komodo dragon, is likely the closest living relative of Megalania. While a Komodo dragon averages about 70 kilograms and can grow up to 3 meters long, Megalania might have weighed up to 2,000 kilograms and reached lengths of up to 7 meters long.
Using Komodo dragons as the bar, scientists believe that Megalania could have run 3 meters per second or 10 kilometers per hour. This may not sound like a lot, but when you're being chased by a 7-meter-long, 2,000-kilo carnivore, it's plenty fast.
Running would have helped them in pursuit of their prey. It's not known for certain what they ate, but scientists believe they chowed down on large mammals like kangaroos, as well as snakes, birds, and other reptiles.
Basically, Megalania ate whatever it could sink its knife-like teeth into.
A study examining the skulls of these lizards suggested that, like the Komodo dragon, Megalania possessed large serrated teeth and was likely able to deliver a venomous bite. The venom would have caused the prey to bleed out and send them into shock.
We're still not 100% sure if they were venomous, but if they were, that means we can add largest venomous animal to ever live to Megalania's list of credentials.
Whether or not Megalania was mainly a predator or a scavenger is still hotly debated. But one study suggests that given its similarities to the Komodo dragon, with a combined arsenal of serrated teeth and likely venom, it was probably a predator.
If they had toxic bites like the Komodo dragon, that would explain how Megalania was able to take down such large prey, despite having relatively weak skulls and low bite force.
Varanids, otherwise known as monitor lizards, are thought to have evolved during the late Cretaceous, a little under 100 million years ago. These ancient species would have crossed into Australia from Asia and evolved into the monitor lizards we know today.
The first fossils of Megalania were found by Sir Richard Owen in 1858 in deposits near the Condamine River in eastern Australia, although they likely didn't live in riverside habitats.
Scientists believe Megalania lived in forests, woodlands, and possibly also grasslands all over Australia. Fossil evidence has been found in almost all Australian states and territories.
Humans showed up in Australia during the Pleistocene as far back as 50,000 years ago during the time of megafauna like Megalania. Unfortunately, many of these sites that these early humans occupied are now lost underwater.
During the Pleistocene, the polar ice caps were fluctuating dramatically in size, causing global weather to rapidly shift between cold, dry periods and warmer, wet intervals.
During the dry periods, the sea levels would fall and open up land bridges to the north with New Guinea. When the warm, wet periods would come, these land bridges would sink back underwater. Any human settlements in these areas were then lost to the sea.
Megalania had its lizard physiology to thank for its ability to survive these climate fluctuations. This is because monitor lizards eat very large meals in one sitting, sometimes upwards of 80% of their body weight. They digest slowly and can survive on just a single feast a month. This infrequent feeding means that Megalania could outlast other carnivores that needed to feed more often during times of scarcity.
So if they were such tough survivors, why aren't there still Megalania hanging out by the Sydney Opera House? Well, there are a number of theories about what caused the mass extinction that killed off Australia's megafauna.
Some postulate that it was climate change that brought down these giants. However, this hypothesis is becoming more highly contested. Fossil evidence suggests that megafauna populations fluctuated with the changing climate, but that it wasn't the main cause of their extinction.
The extinction of Megalania was likely caused by the arrival of humans in Australia. It's not exactly clear how people killed these megafauna, but numerous theories exist.
Some theories suggest that overhunting, especially of juveniles, could have caused populations to collapse. Diseases carried by humans could have also infected native animals. Another theory is that human-made fire could have destroyed megafauna habitats.
There is still so much left to learn about Megalania. The fossils we have are fragmented, and no one has ever found an entire skull or skeleton. But with every new fossil that is found, this massive lizard king becomes a little less lost in time.
Giants used to walk the earth. Even the behemoths of today would look tiny next to their extinct giant counterparts. From snakes the size of a school bus, to sloths that carved massive tunnels, to man-eating carnivorous birds, to whales that fed on other whales. These are some of the largest and most terrifying species that ever lived. This saber-toothed creature with half reptilian, half mammalian features ruled over much of Pangaea, millions of years before the dinosaurs came to be. With giant fangs and powerful bites, why did these animals disappear so abruptly? They were apex predators in the land before time. These are the Gorgonopsians.
Gorgonopsians were some of the most cartoonishly evil-looking genera of animals to ever live. They might have looked like sci-fi monsters, but they were very real, and they were fierce.
The Gorgonopsians first appeared about 265 million years ago In the Permian, a time before the dinosaurs, some species gradually got larger until they became the apex predators of their ecosystem. Some of the species were the size of bears and dominated the cold steppes of Pangaea.
Their name comes from Greek mythology, where Gorgons were snake-haired monsters that could turn you to stone. The most famous of which, of course, was Medusa. But these guys looked more like demogorgons than spooky witches.
They evolved from the first proto-mammals to break away from the reptilian family tree. Though to our very mammalian eyes, they pretty much looked like funky lizards. They even had their legs on the side of their bodies, which is more common in reptiles than in mammals.
By the time Gorgonopsians showed up, they were looking more like the demon dogs we know and love. But were they more mammalian or reptilian?
Their legs were under their body, like in wolves, rather than to the sides, like in crocs or their ancestors. Their skulls were pretty mammalian, and most species had incisors, canines, and molars like we do. And some species, like the fearsome Inostransevia, had long limbs, which made them able to gallop.
And yet, they still had a lot of non-mammalian features.
They had a parietal eye, or third eye, which is a photoreceptive organ that helps cold-blooded animals know the time of day to release hormones that aid in thermoregulation. Being cold-blooded meant that they were less active than mammals. Their brains were more reptilian too, with a larger hindbrain than forebrain.
So overall, I'd say they were like if a Komodo dragon and a saber-toothed cat did the fusion dance. Yes, I said saber-toothed cat. I've been burying the lead here, but Gorgonopsians had gigantic fangs.
All Gorgonopsians had canines that could be replaced a number of times throughout their lives. They used them to stab prey and wait for it to weaken or bleed out before administering the coup de grace. Some of their prey was armored and would fight back, and often this would lead Gorgonopsians to lose their saber teeth. Thankfully, there was a backup dagger on the other side, and the broken one would quickly start growing again. But losing both fangs probably meant death, unless they could find enough carrion while their killing utensils grew back in.
If you've ever tried to eat a burger that was too big, you've probably noticed that the teeth get in the way of deliciousness. This problem was even worse for these beasts with banana-sized fangs.
To get around the neck of their prey, their jaws were double-jointed, which allowed them to open over 90 degrees without unhinging it. This jaw flexibility was necessary, especially because their necks were relatively stiff and were built more like reptilian necks. They could move well side to side, but had issues moving their head up and down.
No wonder they were called Gorgonopsians instead of Gorgoyespians. Okay, that's officially the worst joke I've ever told. Please don't leave.
Also, just like crocs, the muscles that closed their jaws were the temporalis muscles, the muscles on the sides of their head. This made them look bumpy-headed and terrifying, and was also enough to turn them into killing machines that took over their ecosystem. At the time, there was only one supercontinent, Pangaea, but their fossils have only been found in southern Africa and Russia, though they were pretty far from each other.
For a while, there was controversy regarding why there weren't any Gorgons in central Pangaea, but now it seems it was only a question of climate.
Central Pangaea, during this time, was mostly deserts on the west side and swamps in the east. Russia and southern Africa were cold steppes, with large grazers supporting large carnivore populations.
And just like with bears and crocodilians, different regions gave rise to different species.
In Russia, the king of the north was Inostransevia. This is probably the most famous of all Gorgonopsians. It was about 3.5 meters long, with a skull the size of a bear's. It was also about 300 kilograms, about the same as a grizzly bear, though Inostransevias were longer and shorter than Yogi. Their canines were about 15 centimeters long, and their limbs were proportionally longer than those of other Gorgonopsians. which suggests higher speeds for chasing and stabbing. Some of their prey, especially Spinosaurus, had lots of protective armor bones and thick muscle that made them a tough nut to crack. But it was also very slow, and an Inostrancevia was able to stab it through the head, much like how jaguars hunt giant armadillos and caimans. The smaller Smilosaurus had the longest fangs relative to body size of all gorgons, and used them to catch prey like Vivaxosaurus and Scutosaurus, which were like the reptilian cows of the Permian.
Of course, everything must come to an end, and in the case of the Gorgonopsians, the ending was painful and abrupt.
They went extinct during the Permian-Triassic event. High volcanic activity released lots of greenhouse gases, which caused global warming, acid rain, desertification, forest fires, and possibly a breakdown of the ozone layer.
Most of their prey died of starvation, and soon after, the Gorgonopsians disappeared. And then the Archosaurs took over as apex predators, starting the age of the dinosaurs.
But not all of the Gorgonopsians' prey died out. Some of the smaller species survived. They were the ancestors of a successful group of animals that live on to this day. Some of them are even watching this show right now. They gave rise to the mammals.
Thank you, Gorgonopsians, for not eating my grandma millions of generations ago. So what should I talk about next? Please let me know in the comments and be sure to subscribe for new episodes every week. Thanks for watching. See ya!
Nothing under the sea was safe during the Devonian period with this massive armored predator swimming around. This ferocious fish had powerful jaws that could easily turn prey into chum, even its own kind. This fish almost gave the Megalodon a run for its money.